One of the biggest issues with The Flash was its overabundance of characters and its reliance on the concept of Team Flash. I've been particularly critical of the supporting cast of the later seasons, but this did give me an idea to look at the entirety of the show and rank every main character from worst to best. What it means to be a main character is mildly subjective because going off of just the actors who are series regulars includes a lot of characters who those actors do play that aren't main characters, and there are characters who have appeared in more episodes than some series regulars, in addition to some villains as well. I basically decided for myself who I think were the main characters of every season based on what feels right, while also not including villains since I did make a villain ranking video and it's difficult to rank villains within a list of just main characters. With that in mind, we're left with 19 main characters, which just so happens to be the same number as the amount of main villains, so make sure to subscribe and let's begin. It's easy to forget that Cecile Horne debuted all the way back in Season 1 as a nice competent DA with hints at a possible romance with Joe. Boy did this character lose her mind over time. She's fine in Season 3 as well as Joe's love interest, but the second she got pregnant in, I think it was Season 4, Cecile began her downward spiral into insanity. Her powers have always been really irritating, used as this unsubtle and lazy writing tool to explain characters' emotions without having to add any nuance to the characters, which actively detracts from the overall experience of watching the show as it feels like we're being talked down to. Cecile gave birth in the finale of Season 4, but then was confirmed to still have these powers. I think it was in the first episode of Season 5, and the fall continued. Cecile became more and more prevalent on this show, while Joe became less and less so, as her powers kept on developing, and as the new showrunner pretty clearly developed some sort of obsession with her, she only got more and more prevalent, to the point of literally being the main character of Season 9, who has a story and maybe even more screen time than Barry Allen, in which she's at her very worst by far. Her story is terrible, she's constantly gaining new powers, and her superhero persona that she gets near the end is so stupid. Cecile isn't just the worst character on The Flash, but the character that officially cemented the post-crisis era of the Arrowverse as an illegitimate adaptation of the DC Universe as a parody. Keon is legitimately the stupidest idea for a character this show has had. She ticks off every box for what not to do with the character on this show. Not only is she an original character not in the comics, but also a new character appearing out of nowhere in the last season who takes away from the presence of another character, Caitlin Snow. That takes the form of Keon hijacking Caitlin's body for a year while everyone thinks she's dead. No one cares that she's dead, while Keon morphs into an actual goddess, or the Avatar, or whatever, who actually overshadows the importance of the Flash in this universe, while also kind of falling in love with Mark, all of which makes for the single worst character decision in this show's history. Caitlin was so screwed over, and Keon as a character makes no sense. Moreover, Keon falls into the trope of someone without any memory who's incredibly naive, but also says the most insightful things at times, coupling that with incessant borderline creepy smiling, her irritating dialogue, and everything else mentioned earlier. Keon is one of the worst characters I've ever seen on a TV show. Chillblaine is an absolute mess of a character whose presence on the show is so confusingly bad. He starts off as a recurring enemy turned love interest of Frost, but not only is the character himself cringy, I mean put on a shirt, but also his romance with Frost is just vile. Are we supposed to enjoy Frost's constant flirting with this murderer? Are we supposed to forget the murder because she likes him and because, well, he has abs? Chillblaine never gets any better as the show has such a weird insistence on trying to make him a main supporting character, but any and all attempt to do so isn't just super cringy and poorly written and just straight up bad, but also doomed to fail because he's a literal murderer. He needs to go to jail. He doesn't deserve a second chance. It also doesn't help that he's as tied to Frost as he is because he entered the show at Frost's literal lowest ever point, and it only got worse after she died and Keon showed up. Chester is a bargain bin Cisco, worse in every way, even compared to late season Cisco. He's not just worse than the worst version of Cisco, but also he's a copy. He's far less funny, his actor isn't nearly as good at the comedic timing or good at it at all, and his dialogue is so cringy. I hate his echoing shtick, it's so stupid. He has uninteresting dynamics with the rest of the team, his stories are terrible, including meta powers that just disappear and he never uses anymore, despite that being a core characteristic of his comic counterpart, as is being, well, chunky. His relationship with Allegra is awful, and at some point, both characters just become the relationship characters. Chester isn't the single worst Team Flash 2.0 recruit, but he's definitely up there in my opinion. Out of all of the Team Flash 2.0 additions, I think Allegra is the least horrible, but horrible nonetheless. Her powers aren't as bad as Cecile's, and her dialogue isn't as cringy as Chester. Still, her mere existence is laughable, as her comic counterpart was created by the new showrunner when he was a comic writer, and he clearly wants to use his own character, maybe even pay himself royalties if it works that way, I'm not sure. On top of that, Allegra's stories are all so forgettable. Her relationship with Chester is terrible, as I mentioned earlier, and she's absolutely never fun to see on screen, especially in the field. She never gets a costume or even a code name, although looking at Cecile, that might be a good thing. In my opinion, Killer Frost in Season 3 was literally just Caitlyn. It wasn't until Season 4 they were retconned into being two separate characters, which if you watch Season 3 is simply not the case. That's clearly Caitlyn, not a different personality, and because of that, I'm counting Killer Frost in Season 3 as a part of Caitlyn Snow. Because of that, Frost has literally not had a single good season. Killer Frost being a villain in Season 3 was genuinely interesting and well handled. Frost being a separate character, and especially becoming a hero, was the last thing I wanted to see done with this character, a character who initially was called Killer Frost. That's not the name of a hero. I think this was a mistake from the start, and basically everything they've done since then was so uninteresting. Retconning her backstory, creating a sisterly relationship with Caitlyn, separating the two physically, and then falling in love with Chillblaine especially. I've just never cared for any of it, and it simply got worse and worse over time, to the point where I was glad that she died. Unfortunately, unlike Caitlyn, who was great in the earlier seasons, Frost never got that chance, but it was a bad idea for a character anyway from the start. They should have never been two separate personalities, and Frost should have never been a hero. Nash Wells was initially a huge step up from the previous 3 seasons of nothing that was the seasonal and rotating Harrison Wells, as his connection to the coming crisis elevated him to a genuine relevant character whose existence was necessary, and the fact that he ended up actually being Pariah was a really cool twist that not only works really well in the story, but technically makes him an adaptation of a DC character, while every other version of Harrison Wells we've met up until this point is now a doppelganger of Pariah, and that was cool. However, the crisis came and went, and just as the Flash took a nosedive in quality, so did Nash Wells, as he reverted back to the personality he had prior to the crisis, which was so lame, and his story became entirely about Allegra, which is just as lame, or even more so. Nash is so strange, as during the Bloodwork arc, and especially in the crisis itself, he was the first time in years Wells was interesting. The second the crisis ended, he became the worst ever main Wells, and considering that's around 2/3 of his screen time, I think in general he is only mildly worse than the next Wells on the list, but still worse regardless. H.R. Wells is the exact personification of the Harrison Wells problem this show had for half of its run, seasons 3, 4, 5, and 6, as H.R. is a far sillier, far more disposable Harry Wells with less story, worse dynamics with the characters aside from maybe Wally, and little to no contribution to the team. He literally doesn't really do anything. He's a character who genuinely feels like he shouldn't exist, creating the problem of it being impossible to connect to these constantly switching seasonal Wellses, which really didn't help the already bad twist that was his death, switching Iris. In the vein of Miss Marvel, H.R. Wells can be funny and he's entertaining and it's impossible to hate him, and Tom Cavanagh does a great job at making all these Wellses feel distinct. He's just largely unnecessary and it's impossible to connect to him, and he creates the problem this show would continue to have until the beginning of season 7. Keeping in mind that this particular entry only counts Nora's appearance in Season 5, as anything afterwards is technically a different character who's never a main character, Nora is a character who only really works if you forget how old she's supposed to be. The actor is 34, which is older than both Grant and Candace. That's fine, she is from the future, but the character is at least 25 years old, and yet she's written like she's a child for most of the season, which can be very off-putting. It's a borderline plot hole. She's a teenager who was born 25 years before we see her. It makes no sense. I do enjoy a lot of her interactions with Barry. She works mostly as the emotional core of the season, and her story involving Thawne was the highlight of the season, but the way she's written, the dialogue she's given is baffling considering her age, which almost completely ruins her character. Sherlock Wells is the 3rd season in a row where using Harrison Wells from another universe was a genuine mistake. Tom Cavanagh is great in the role. He makes each character feel distinct, and if I'm being honest, Sherlock himself himself is one of the best parts of Season 5, as his investigation of Nora consistently overshadowed any cicada plot, peaking in the single best moment of the season. Genuinely, Sherlock is technically a good character, but I cannot get past the fact that he should have never existed. As previously mentioned, it's impossible to get invested in these seasonal Welleses, who are simply too silly, and you know they're going to leave at the end of the season. But what makes Sherlock even worse in that regard is that his existence also makes another character worse, stealing the detective storyline that should have rightfully went to Ralph Dibny, who did not get enough to do. Still, Sherlock is the second best Wells, since he does genuinely have a good story, and again, Tom Cavanagh is good in the role. Caitlin Snow has gone drastically downhill over the years, probably more so than any other character, starting off as this really cute and charming side character in seasons 1 and 2 with an endearing friendship with Barry and Cisco, and these incredibly heartbreaking love stories. Caitlin peaks in season 3 as she becomes Killer Frost prior to Killer Frost becoming a separate personality, and she's a great secondary main villain with genuine main villain potential, as her past relationship with Team Flash makes her so much more personal than Killer Frost ever has been. Caitlin really should have left the show after season 3 though. From season 4 onwards, it was a Bruce Banner Hulk situation, and then had her story entirely focusing on bonding with her quote-unquote sister, retconning her backstory to include her icicle father, and then Caitlin and Frost physically split. It's like a snowball effect of bad ideas that just gets worse and worse, ultimately landing on the bottom and going splat in the form of Keon. But even before that, Caitlin kind of lost her mind. Caitlin's role in season 9 was literally being possessed the entire season, while everyone thinks she's dead but no one cares. Caitlin was great in seasons 1 to 3, but took a nosedive in season 4 and only became worse and worse as the seasons went on. Like I've said since basically season 4 began, season 3 was a natural conclusion to the character of Caitlin Snow. She should have left the show at that point, remaining a villain. I feel like I'm definitely in the minority here, but I've never truly hated Iris, maybe because she's one of the few actual Flash characters, one of 3 alongside Wally and Barry, maybe because comparing her to the love interest of certain other Arrowverse shows, she's less annoying, but people seem to be very adamant about Iris being the worst character on this show, and I genuinely think there's one season where that is true, and that's it, that's season 4, where she does practically become the main character and leader of Team Flash, which just doesn't make any sense, and feels so wrong for the character. It's also really frustrating when other characters are so much more qualified. However, she's an effective enough CW drama love interest in season 1, while also doing some investigative journalism of her own, and is even better in season 2 as her story with her mother and Wally is rather compelling. The problem started near the end of season 2 when she suddenly out of nowhere decided that she's madly in love with Barry. From then on out, the show became absolutely obsessed with them as a couple and the power of their love, like the literal power, which outside of the occasional journalism is basically all that Iris does later on, as the writers have literally no idea what to do with this character. Honestly, I've never hated Iris. I think she was bad in season 4, but from then on out, she's kind of just a very boring character that the writers have no idea what to do with. Eddie Thawne just about manages to enter the group of characters I consider to be good or B tier, as he's helped greatly by being exclusive to season 1, which is also the best season. Well, that's not entirely true. He became the final main villain of the show in season 9, but like I previously mentioned, I'm not considering villains for this video, and unlike Killer Frost, who was kind of also a supporting character at the same time, Eddie in season 1 is so drastically different from season 9 Eddie, and is so clearly not a villain, that I decided to count him as a separate person for this video at the very least. In season 1, Eddie is just a very pleasant and nice individual that as the romantic rival to Barry, you feel like you should dislike, but it's impossible to. He's used effectively as a sort of red herring for who Reverse Flash might be because of his name, and finally, being Reverse Flash's ancestor is used interestingly in his interactions between the two or certain other characters talking about it, and kinda his death, although that seems like it was a bit of a drastic measure, maybe just decide to get a vasectomy or something. Regardless, Eddie was never a fantastic character or anything, but he was good in season 1 and remains untainted by later seasons. Well, I mean, he was tainted by later seasons, but again, kind of a different character, or at least he feels like it. Wally had a really good introduction season, as he's a part of this emotional arc of the mess that is the West family, while learning to idolize the Flash, which is followed up on very satisfyingly in Wally's best season, season 3, the only season that we actually got to see the Flash Kid Flash pairing for most of it, and it's just a lot of fun. It's pulled off well. However, Wally is hard to fully judge because his character kind of just abruptly leaves at the beginning of season 4 for reasons that are out of the control of the writers. It's hard to look past that though, as the Flash's main sidekick with the biggest role on the show was not Kid Flash. It was, I think, maybe Frost. In addition, even in his best season, Wally kind of just had the habit of falling by the wayside as the show struggled with keeping pace with having two speedsters at the same time. Still, Wally definitely passes the threshold for what I consider to be a good character. It's possible that it's a good thing that he didn't stick around after season 4. It's very likely he just would have gotten worse and worse, like almost everyone else. Joe is the absolute perfect example of a character who the writers simply lost interest in and clearly couldn't think of a role for, as Joe, like the show, peaked in season 1, as his dynamic with Barry is at its most entertaining and emotional and endearing, while Joe is the key character investigating Wells for the majority of the season, which is a very compelling story. Joe managed to remain relevant for a few more seasons, with his stories involving meeting his son in season 2 and knowing his daughter is going to die in season 3 working well. However, season 4 onwards, Joe was kind of just there, not doing much, not contributing, not having nearly as many of the interactions with Barry or many other characters that made him great in the first place. Joe becomes less and less relevant while his girlfriend becomes more and more so eventually, literally in the last 4 seasons, he's a character defined by being Cecile's boyfriend. He would be defined by being like Jenna's dad, but Jenna never appears either. It's hard to forget how great he was in the earlier seasons and the occasional moment later on when he would be given something to do, but damn if the writers simply didn't know what to do with this once incredible character who was pivotal to the success of season 1. The idea of bringing in Harrison Wells from an alternate universe to keep Tom Cavanaugh's talents on the show while bringing up interesting dynamics with Team Flash didn't just peak in the first outing during season 2, it was also the only time it truly worked. During season 2, Harry Wells is a complex and layered character with a compelling story working for but then betraying Team Flash for understandable reasons before finally being accepted into the team, but also having a backstory with the main villain. However, the best thing about Harry was his absolutely delightful interactions with Cisco, which almost single-handedly made season 2 the show's funniest season, despite arguably also being its darkest. Harry is let down a bit by his role in season 4, as the show insists on keeping up this different Wells every season shtick, as him being there ruins a perfectly capped off story, and also the story of him becoming dumb was in and of itself dumb, as are the Council of Wells. There are redeeming qualities to season 4 Wells, like he's generally entertaining and funny, but he's nowhere near the layered and complex character he was in season 2. Still, he's definitely one of the best characters on this show, just because of his role in season 2, and the general low amount of actually bad seasons that he's a part of or has a story in. No non-season 1, non-also main villain cast addition left as positive of an impact on this show as Hartley Sawyer joining the show in season 4 with a very interesting and morally complex backstory tied to Barry, becoming the emotional hook of the season and generally being a really fun character with a great actor and a really cool superhero in my opinion. Season 4 is however where Ralph peaked, where he was actually not yet a series regular and it was only downhill from there. However, compared to a lot of other characters, he didn't go that much downhill. He simply just didn't have much to do in season 5, as like I mentioned earlier, he was robbed of his rightful investigation story arc given to yet another disposable Wells, and while he remained entertaining in seasons 5 and 6, he simply wasn't given the amount to do that he was in season 4. Sadly, Ralph was kicked off the show between season 6 and 7 due to some tweets of Hartley Sawyer's from 10 years ago, which is in direct opposition to Ralph's initial arc in the show of redeeming himself from his darker past, but maybe it was a blessing in disguise for the character, as the elongated man was never subjected to the god-awful writing or stories of seasons 7 and 9, and as such remains largely unsullied. Cisco has always been the comedic relief tech guy of the show, which every Arrowverse show has, but he's so much better than the rest in that regard, as Carlos Valdez's comedic timing is great, and Cisco's friendships with Barry and Caitlin are endearing, and especially his friendships with the Welleses, especially Harry Wells, is so entertaining. Additionally, his powers are implemented so well in the season-long storylines of seasons 1 and especially 2. However, every single aspect of the character of Cisco Ramon degraded over time. Peaking in season 2, Cisco became less and less funny, his interactions with the Welleses became less and less entertaining, as the Welleses became more and more silly, and the show clearly had no idea what to do with him since like season 4, since he became Vibe fully. Season 5's Metahuman Cure arc and season 7's Mecha Vibe story are true low points. He does remain remain an entertaining character up until the end of his run, but a shadow of his former self. Still, it's hard to forget what a delightful character he was in seasons 1 and 2, and even a bit in seasons 3 and 4. Surprise, surprise, the main character of The Flash is the best character on The Flash. However, Barry Allen is nowhere near a perfect character, and I struggle to even call him great. If this was a tier list, he would be an A-tier character, and there would be 0 S-tier main characters because, honestly, the degrading quality of the show. He is practically perfect in season 1 as the fledgling hero who's learning how to be the Flash from week to week while uncovering the mysteries of his own personal past. Unfortunately, the show has struggled greatly with getting Barry out of that initial phase, as he never truly becomes the competent, experienced hero he should be, at least for very long. However, Barry's the main character. The show is infinitely more interesting when he's the focus, and Grant Gustin is the quintessential live-action Barry Allen casting, so despite his flaws, The Flash is by far the most compelling and most interesting character on this show, without whom I wouldn't even watch it. The show would be absolutely void of reason to watch, which is true for the episodes where he doesn't have a role. So that's my ranking for every main character on The Flash. Arguably not a very good group of characters. A lot of them suck, a lot of them get bad over time, and season 9 has one of the worst main casts I've ever seen on a show, which is so sad because season 1 has one of the best main casts I've seen on a show. Everyone is at their A game. Everyone has a purpose. It sucks how far The Flash fell, especially with its characters.
That is true. That is true. Anyways.